Hello everyone and welcome to today's session, Strategies for Building Cyber Resilient Organizations. I am Shilpa Goswami and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to organizers or our speaker, use the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio-video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. Admissions are currently open. For further details about our courses, please visit our website www.eccu.edu mentioned in the chat section. Our speakers for today's session, Heather Noggle. Heather is the owner of Codista, a process solution company that weaves technology and human experience together to guide customers to find unique answers to the most vexing problem in those areas where people and technology meet. She has over 30 years of experience in software development, project management, human resources, writing, and cybersecurity advocacy. Heather is passionate about helping people protect themselves as well as safeguard their private data. She currently serves as Vice Chair of Springfield Tech Council and also volunteers with Missouri Cybersecurity Center of Excellence and Redeemer Lutheran Church. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Heather.
Hello to everyone, good day, and thank you for joining this session. I am Heather Noggle, and I am going to be your host for today about cyber resilient organizations. We mentioned the 30 years of experience. Well, I have 25 of that in technology directly, and before that was the HR and the work with the government. So most of that is county government and university experience. And in the 1990s, if we were working in something other than tech but had tech experience, I think we had a lot of opportunity to get into technology, and that is what happened to me. So most of my experience in the 25 years officially being in tech is in software and in the software development life cycle. I've been securing things for all of it, but we didn't call it then. So security wasn't necessarily a focal point of software development in the early days, but within the HR, with all of that data with HR and government, and that 30 years of experience, 25 specifically in tech, I'm here to bring you today what it means to be cyber resilient in organizations. Helpful foundation for this discussion, we're going to assume a few things about an organization that's on its path toward being cyber resilient. And that will be that the organization's leadership understands and it values cybersecurity as part of its business continuity, the ability to do business now and in the future. So within that, there's obviously privacy, keeping private data private, and also the fact that there are benefits that technology brings to modern organizations that would not be there if they were not technologically advanced. Second, helpful foundation assumption is that there is a known and documented change management process within the organization. So with that, there's an understanding that there's change necessary as technology changes, as society changes, to keep up and also make sure there's nothing stagnant within the organization so that it can continue to do business, whether that's in a nonprofit or a for-profit perspective. And then that leadership agrees that there's work that needs to be done, and that will always be work that needs to be done with cybersecurity. The software experience I have is largely in the supply chain and logistics, and specifically in export compliance perspective. And in that industry, there needs to be a manual from an exporting organization for the US where the top leadership signs off on principles such as these. So that's a helpful way to understand that in order for cyber resilience to take place, the organization has to have a commitment to it. So everything in business now is all connected. When you look at the internet, We are all truly connected. My home connection, I'm working from home today. It's connected, and possibly your refrigerator is connected onto the internet as well. There's Taylor Swift's tour bus is probably connected if it's moving. Janice's dentist, whoever Janice is, it's all connected. And because of that, each of us is responsible for our own security. And focus on that responsibility will help an organization that is almost there in seeking resilience to give it a nudge. I think that stories and allegories and conversations for those organizations that aren't quite ready to make the leap to get that ownership from the top down, that those are key principles to get us there, to recognize that we are all connected and we are each responsible for security, that responsibility. And it's also all about business, people, and culture. Cybersecurity is often seen as a technical pursuit, but when we're looking from an organizational resilience perspective, it is largely the decisions made by people within the culture of the organization and making sure that that is modern enough to understand that even with the costs of cybersecurity, the costs of not doing cybersecurity are much greater. So these early stages and then later continued adoption and maturity of changes in cybersecurity, these require people. So this talk is largely people-centered, and there are 5 main points about this talk. We know that cybersecurity requires that we look at the invisible, because cyber criminals, they're invisible unless you're a technologist looking at the trails that they leave at their attacks. To regular people, cybersecurity and the internet and everything happening online, it's all very invisible, but we know that it's not an imaginary threat, even though it is invisible. We also know that privacy is definitely worth protecting for compliance reasons, legal reasons, and regulatory reasons, but also because that's good business. If we're not protecting privacy, then we don't have a very good reputation within our organization, as cyber breaches point out, to the loss of potential revenue for businesses. All business risk touches cybersecurity. So that's an area to prove with an organization that is looking into being better at cybersecurity and the why behind it. We also, looking ahead, need to consider emerging technologies and the impact of cybersecurity or the lack of cybersecurity on those emerging technologies in our organizations. And then finally, it is just good business. I have my own definition of cybersecurity I like to use that borrows off of a lot of standards, but I'll just read it to you. And please know that cats truly do run the internet. That's my own personal view and why there are several of them sitting on data over here. People, processes, and technology working together to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. In other words, we're keeping private data private and enabling proper access to other data, that data that may be available to be public in certain circumstances. Some kudos to the cats. And then we're going to tackle that invisible aspect. So cyber criminals, they're invisible to much of the world. They show up in the news sometimes, especially in attacks against big organizations. But we, as organizations of all size, need to protect against these attacks that we can't initially see, certainly if we're people doing our jobs within the business that has nothing to do with cybersecurity. And so, especially in the terms of fraud areas where humans are attacking humans to gain an initial foothold into systems, we have to make these attack vectors visible and obvious. And that happens through training. We have to train our staff, even if we have a big organization with really whiz-bang cybersecurity available that will catch just about everything coming in via phishing emails and maybe even on devices, making sure that there's nothing coming in on those. As far as attacks go, we still have low-tech attacks coming against the human, maybe on phone, maybe even in person, trying to get into physical access into a building. So there are certain attacks we just don't see coming, whether they are technical or not, and we have to make them as visible and obvious as possible through training. And our behaviors too, the core cyber hygiene that individual people need to undertake, that is part of the training as well. because there are these risks and this impact to business. We know that ransomware is a very profitable attack vector used by cyber criminals, and that needs to be at the forefront as well. And understanding if we are attacked and we do end up with ransomware, what are we going to do about it? And then planning ahead, getting the right staff in the right roles, because everyone needs to be trained. Even though that training, the specific training, may vary, a role-based set of training, there's still training that everyone needs to undertake. And then we understand this problem. I think that the history, that's something that I am very keen on providing with 30 years of technology, watching the internet be a thing only at universities into being something that everyone has maybe text-based access to, into what the World Wide Web, as we used to call it, and then into business, and in that order. So understanding how we got where we are from business that didn't even used to be online to today where everything is fully interconnected, like I talk about with the example of the refrigerator, and then somebody's business, a small business, a large business. So these are all very important things to understand the why, and that sets the stage for a good way to go through an organization and how it hopes to be resilient with cybersecurity and get its best bang for its buck with its dollars. Because privacy is worth protecting. So with staff and in that training, we define privacy in a way that staff members can relate. And that's relevant data within the organization and also private data that people keep at home and want to protect. In the United States, that's the Social Security number. And as best we can protect that, we hope to. And then private information about our health. Things like that are also ways to help with training on why privacy is important. The key advantages to a company, that speaks to stewardship in privacy's place in the organization's values of these are the private things that keep the company competitive. If those private pieces of information are lost, then the company might no longer be competitive and also might have a reputation hit because of a known data breach, which points to compliance and beyond. Compliance is the first step on building a cyber resilient organization. Beyond are the maturity of that compliance and all of the undertakings that the organization does to stay in business. So we look at compliance. There's HIPAA for the health and information. There's the PCI compliance for credit cards, and then there's certainly others. We have compliance pieces we have to undertake depending on where we live and the laws we adhere to. In the United States, we are affected by the GDPR for the EU if we have even one customer in the EU, and that's important to know. So compliance starts with knowledge. There are all sorts of areas of compliance that don't have to do with cybersecurity, so it's a larger conversation. In terms of cybersecurity, though, it's important to look at these things that I have listed and many more. I'd like to quickly point out that US states also have differing regulations, and there are some that are in effect and there are others that are soon to be in effect. Moving on, there are customers' expectations, which are for strong privacy. If an organization hopes to continue in business, it has to be serious about its privacy protections and also detailing to current and prospective customers how it protects data, how it keeps data private. Because all of these things point to good business ethics, there has to be a commitment that privacy is worth protecting. Risk also as a focus. Risk posture is a major component of how each organization does its business, and so it is best to be intentional about it instead of just doing business as we've always done. And risk may be something we haven't stated as this is how we do risk explicitly and intentionally. So a way to look at that is to name cybercrime as an explicit risk. And you see the four main ways we look at risk in the risk management frameworks are you can avoid it, and that would be you don't do any business with computers, and that's absurd in the 21st century. So risk avoidance isn't a possibility. Instead, we can reduce risk or mitigate it, and we do that through controlling behaviors, which now, again, pointing back to governance and compliance and then beyond. We can transfer some risk through cybersecurity insurance, but not all. And so Finally, we look at accepting risk as though, oh, it'll never be a problem. Unfortunately, for many organizations, we accept more risk than we should. So what that really leads to is these two middle areas where we're going to spend most of our time if we're going to be a cyber resilient organization. We can reduce and mitigate that risk through controlling behaviors used frameworks that have been proven, or we can transfer parts of it to cyber insurance. And that is the cyber resilient way of looking at things, these two middle points. Where each organization falls on its reliance on insurance and its proactiveness with controlling behaviors is going to differ by organization. We do need to regularly revisit cybersecurity as a risk that enables business, and for cybersecurity leadership, that's a very important point to make, and to make regularly. I think that a lot of organizations might believe that a good set of cybersecurity risk mitigation factors, when those are in place, that everything just might be done. And that's a definite fallacy, because cybersecurity and becoming better at it and becoming more mature is the path. It's not completing a path. The journey is never done. In this review of everything cybersecurity and looking at resilient organizations, we have to look at emerging technologies, those of today and those of tomorrow. The big ones of today are, of course, generative AI and its use within business, and then quantum computing and its risks at potentially breaking our core cryptography of today. There are others, though, that we have to look into as what might be coming. And in manufacturing, you see on the lower right there, the advanced robotics and digital transformation. A lot of manufacturers have heavy focus on digitizing just about everything in their operations for efficiency's sake. And of course, there are cybersecurity concerns there as well. With supply chain and logistics, and also expanded automation within those digital transformation efforts. 2 weeks ago, I attended an event called Think Summit. And Think Summit is a series of lightning talks that are about 10 minutes in length for many, and a few were 20 minutes in length. The MC of the event was on stage back and forth several times, and one of the major sponsors of the event came on stage midday. We had seen the MC probably, again, 3 or 4 times, so everyone knew what she looked like. In a presentation about emerging technologies, one of the sponsors took some technology, some AI technology, and made a deep fake of the MC, and it was really, really good. If you knew her, you might suspect, but she talked for probably about 90 seconds about things that would make sense in context of this talk at Think Summit. And near the end of this, the technology came into play with a visual on screen of an audio wave. And that visual had the MC, deepfake, talking, and it said something like this. Hi, honey. I can't pick you up today from school. I'm sending, and then she talked about the car that she was sending to pick you up. I love you, and I'll see you at home. And then the video ended of the audio, and everyone in the room was silent. Everyone. So that is an area we have to be looking at in cybersecurity. We're going back to the humans and that training that I've been talking about, and how important it is that we understand that this technology to fool us with technology is here today. So that's how it impacts people with deep fakes. Scams using technology that doesn't even seem to be technical. It's just a video call, or it's just an audio file. That's old technology. But new technology makes it possible to fake people. And what are we going to do about that? How are businesses going to take a look at what that means to their businesses and how things can be faked? So I'll leave this here for just a moment and go back then to the generative AI that makes much of this possible. Anything we do in business with generative AI, if we want to be cybersecurity resilient, we have to make sure that any data going into AI is sanitized, that we cannot individually identify a person out of the data. In that, we have to verify AI output as well. It is extraordinarily eager to please whoever is prompting it. And it also will make hallucinations, we call it. I like to call them fabrications because it will seem to draw conclusions that make absolutely no sense. And that is an area that each organization has to look at how it is going to put policies and practices in place so that private data remains private within AI. And that is done through frameworks. There's some emerging AI frameworks that I would encourage you to take a look at so that organizations get ahead of AI. Quantum computing, a little bit earlier yet, but that will be accelerated, and we have to make sure that we are ahead of what's going to come, even though we don't know exactly when it's going to come. So cybersecurity is good business. Why? We know we have to stay where we are today to be current. We know we have to look toward the future based on the last slide. Can't continually play catch up and can't ever have a mindset to be resilient of, am I done yet? These dollars are not going back into other budgets, at least not yet. So what does that mean in the demands of the future requiring present cybersecurity? We need that foundation. Today, we've got to be where we need to be so that we can be ready for tomorrow and not be continually playing catch up. We have to find and mitigate risks within our organizations. We have to harden against breaches so that these don't happen. The familiar identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and now govern in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, for example. We need to prepare for proving to our customer that we can do good business. We need to manage insurance premiums. Every year, those seem to go up for business owners. And understanding needs to be there of exactly, again, what risk to transfer to insurance and what needs to be handled within the business. And this too may change every year. We need to do these things so that we can establish and control what budgets are needed within organizations and where necessary, have the proper proofs in place to justify expansion of those budgets to meet these emerging threats and our existing threats. And here's where we spend the last part of our discussion today. It's all about the governance and the frameworks and proofs and documentation and policies. We amplify resilience through governance, through making sure we're doing what we're saying we're going to do, for keeping abreast of changes in regulations, whether they're worldwide or within a single country, or in the US within a single state. Throughout our businesses and these communications and in these trainings, we strive for continuous improvement. And how do we do that? We have to look within our people, through our people, and within these regulations. Policies are exceptionally important. They have to be thoughtful and they have to be written in clear, usable language, whether they are policies for internal staff or whether they are policies that will be used by customers. Acceptable use policy, for example. The policies we even have to make may change. AI policies are new within organizations. Metrics need to track that for compliance and then well beyond compliance. There's cybersecurity considerations within each department within an organization. I'll list a few of them. Research and development, clear data that is considered crown jewel data, data we have to protect at a higher risk point than perhaps data about other areas. There's data within HR, certainly personally identifying information within HR. There's data in sales about customers and prospective customers. There's data in marketing, a clear expectations of what data we can use to our general public and what data needs to be kept private and then perhaps sanitized into general concepts that help sell our products. So you can see what I'm talking about clearly specifying what data can be public, what data can be private, and how we measure things in terms of keeping that compliance. There are tabletop exercises that we can use to find and fill the gaps in everything that we do. And these lead specifically to incidents, especially would be a good place to start. So those policies having to do with incident response, business continuity, and then also disaster recovery. If you've never done one of these, they are fascinating business exercises because each one I've done, I've recognized that there are always pieces that need to be available in the event that perhaps we don't think through unless we're talking about that specific scenario. So a couple key questions there to talk about. What happens with the data breach? What do we do? Who do we contact first? What impacts our organization's people, and what expectations do they have that there will even be an event, or what they would need to do in order to continue as much business as possible in the moment of determining what to do? From a broader governance perspective, what's going to impact the organization's future if we are down for a week, for 6 weeks, for 3 months? What if we're struggling for a period of time? I know of a furniture store that was partially down for several months. Did they plan that? They did not. What impacts our organization's customers? And additionally, how do we look to game that out? These tabletop exercises help with that. And then to review, revisit, and revise regularly all of these things about cybersecurity. This is a discussion that needs to happen within an organization well beyond what tools we're going to buy, what machines might or might not be necessary for the future. These are the key points that we need to govern. So about frameworks, again, very important for this governance because frameworks help us not reinvent the wheel every time. Frameworks will remind us that we need to train our people. They will also remind us of the technical controls that we need to put in place. And while that isn't really the focus of this conversation, technical controls definitely have a big place in cyber resilience. And I think that that's one of the conversation points that's difficult because many organizations look at cybersecurity as mostly a technical problem that can be solved fully through technology implemented once, as I mentioned before. With that, I'm going to do something a little unorthodox, given that we have a little bit of time. I think this is a topic that deserves a little extra time for conversation today. I would like to open it up after I wrap it up. Cyber resilience results from risk management practices, including cybersecurity, because it is a part of business in this modern area, and it must be fully incorporated in through all the prepositions with operations. And cybersecurity is therefore a business concern managed and hopefully solved by people who are using technology. Because, these points again, cyber criminals are an invisible but not an imaginary threat. And our privacy is worth protecting because all business risk touches cybersecurity in this modern age. Those emerging technologies are probably the most interesting thing to talk about and through. And so I imagine we'll have some conversation about that. It is good business. And I'll list some business aspects where cybersecurity makes really good sense. It's information security. Who we let come in through our doors and how we list that, that's physical security, but that's part of information security. Who we let see our data, the idea of zero trust, whether that's with people or with machines. We start with machines. And then one of the things I like to talk about with people is if a person's not in front of me, I'll consider it to be digital. I'll consider that person to be a digital representation, much like the MC and the deepfake I talked about. So it's very possible that there's Heather, the person speaking with you right now, is still digital because she's not right in front of you. And so trust should be at a minimum because unless the person is verified in the moment, it's worth zero trust. So that is also a good consideration for business risk, is making sure zero trust is implemented and to use the frameworks available within to do that. Again, it's good business to bring cybersecurity and information security to everyone within the business, understanding that it is a human problem and it is a technical problem, and then we govern it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Heather, for an informative session, and our attendees share the same sentiments. If you are interested to learn more about our program, do let us know in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training, and we will reach out to you soon. Also, as I said before, admissions are currently open. For further details about our courses, please visit our website www.eccu.edu. The website is mentioned in the chat section. So, Heather, shall we start with the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Okay. So our first question to you is, what are the strategies of building a secure and safe internet by cybersecurity practices?
Practices first to build safety and security is to consider that maybe you're a business that's just starting from day one, even though you're likely not. What would you do? And the idea would be to start with training in cyber hygiene and assess where are we with the things we need to be against one of the frameworks that is proven so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then that the understanding also of what to expect, that everything isn't going to be perfect in the initial implementation of a cybersecurity program or even in the evaluation of an existing one. And so there would need to be agreement within the organization of here's what we're hoping to achieve in this first level of effort, and then what we're hoping to achieve in the next. It's very hard to map out the entirety of when we're done because, again, we're never done and everything will change over time. It's to know what metrics we're going to shoot against, and then also to know our risk tolerance. So I know I hit probably 4 or 5 different areas in that response. So if I didn't address what you're hopeful that I did, please ask the question again, and I will be a little more specific.
Sure. Thank you, Heather. Our next question is, any chances that AI can take over cybersecurity scopes? How do we get ready for it?
I think AI will have its place. I like to talk about AI and its current generative AI expression as being a robotic arm. The things we do well, AI can do better for us with our inputs. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that if we're working in areas where we're nearly expert, we can evaluate how well AI is doing. So if you take a cybersecurity expert and have that person work with an AI, then I think you'll have much greater emphasis than taking non-technical people and asking them to work within building cybersecurity because those people cannot evaluate how effective the AI is, when it's lying, etc. So I am not at this juncture going to recommend that cybersecurity be fully implemented with AI, and I don't know that we'll ever be there given the human factors in place and how we need to guard and protect, because we will have to evolve also in how we train our people based on the attacks that are coming from AI. So I remain cautiously optimistic that the good guys will win with AI, but it usually tends that the people who have ill intent have a better shot at a new technology becoming helpful for them before it catches up with the rest of us.
Thank you, Heather, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, how should small, medium business leadership approach cybersecurity if they have limited IT security staff and budget?
With limited cybersecurity staff and budget, I believe small businesses need to understand their risks first. So it is that risk conversation. That cybersecurity can't be an individual effort from some people within the company, although they can advocate with the leaders of the company that everything be a better effort towards cybersecurity. Where do we start? We start with some frameworks and some basics. And I like to say we start with training people on why it's important and getting organizational buy-in that some changes need to be made. Change is hard, leading back to that change management. A lot of change will not take effect unless everyone agrees that it's all for the better. And with cybersecurity, early implementation can be painful to individual users who do not understand why we need to make changes, because after all, everything that is working today works just fine. Again, some cybersecurity threats are completely invisible, and that may be hard to change within an organization, the perception that things need to change. So change management is a place where it starts, a clear framework and understanding of where we can stop and celebrate for a moment. I like to call them marching band pictures. If you've ever seen a marching band, for just a brief moment, everyone is moving to one place and then they pause for just a second and then they move to the next place. Those are evaluation places. A small business with an intention and a framework can say, we've done these things. We know we're not done. There's always more work to do, but we can celebrate that we did this work and we're safer than we were before we did. And then a series of ongoing, much like we do with business, with quarterly meetings and changing how we implement our mission and vision. Cybersecurity needs to be handled in the same way, with a business perspective of, we've done these things, here's what's next for us, and celebrate what we've done, knowing there's a whole lot more work to be done.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question is, do you agree that cyber risk is a business risk?
Absolutely a business risk. I think all cyber risk is 98% a business risk. And the reason is because of these things I've mentioned, we have the control through the people and their actions, and we have the reasons to protect the data. They are business reasons. So remove computers and technology from the core risks that are presented with cybersecurity, data loss, privacy loss, customer reputation loss. Those have existed long before we added computers to the mix. Computers have made it easier to do business, but also certainly easier to lose data and customer trust. So if we start with cybersecurity as a business risk and we have those conversations with non-technical people who may not see it as such, I think that we will have much greater impact in influencing the leaders of organizations to make cybersecurity changes and budgets.
Thank you so much, Heather, for answering that question. Our next question is, how do I protect my organization from cyber attacks from other threat or malicious actors?
That's that people, processes, and technology. And if we talk at this level about malicious threat actors, obviously technology comes here as well. And most of the attacks that we receive daily will be through our networks and through our web applications. And part of the business conversation is, what are our risky attack vectors? And while we're training our people on how to behave so that they're not defrauded and socially engineered, we also have to have something in place to monitor and to do cyber hygiene, to back up our data, to make sure our passwords for our users are long and that they're strong and that they are adhering to our password policies to go back into governance, to implement multi-factor authentication. So going back to the small business examples, these are things that small businesses can do. And then also antivirus, anti-malware, EDR, MDR, if you want to go to the larger, bigger organizations and into more technical areas, making sure that we are monitoring what's happening to us and what we're doing. And I always forget at least one thing in these big areas that we need to do, but testing our backups, doing these tabletop exercises, it's really a big comprehensive thing. And since my area is more focused on business, I would ask technologists to be ready to be asked within your organizations to come and present the details of what needs to happen within the technical controls, so that there's the full business working together to secure the organization in a way that makes sense. And then the behaviors that need to change within the organization as far as cyber hygiene goes, and that additional training against fraud.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question is, what measures are in place to protect our organization's sensitive data from cyber threats?
That too will vary by organization, and there may be no measures for some companies. And I think that logs are very important from a technical perspective to measure that. I think that it is also very important to know who's been trained, to have efficient onboarding and offboarding practices for employees from an HR perspective. So making sure that access does not remain for people who shouldn't have it. Those are good metrics to be able to tell the onboarding date and the training dates, the offboarding date, and then verify that these things have actually happened. I think that from the social engineering side, we should know who's been phished, who's fallen for phishes, and how we've remediated that. We need to be able to take some temperature from a qualitative side of the people working in the organization and how they feel about cybersecurity. And then from the more technical side, there are certain measures we need to put in place as well for the metrics that the organization values. Those should be written somewhere so that everyone agrees, because the metrics we value today may change from the metrics we value next quarter or next year or even next month.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question is, how often are security assessments and audits conducted to identify vulnerabilities?
I think certain things should be conducted monthly or weekly as per my favorite framework, which is the CIS version 8. There are certain things we need to be monitoring for, so we could call that a piece of the assessment. And then there are other aspects that don't need as frequent of a check. So it really pertains to what the organization will bear beyond compliance and what it scans and how it handles its technical components to that.
Thank you, Heather. We really have a lot of questions for you today. As
Okay,
I
I'm glad
said,
I stopped a little early then. I'm glad there are questions.
yeah. Okay, so our next question is, what backup and disaster recovery plans are in place to mitigate the impact of cybersecurity incidents?
Well, backups, I think, vary depending on your type of data. We know that there's the 3-2-1 backup process, that you need 3 copies of your backup. You need 2 of them on different media, and you need 1 of them at least to be off-site. And it's going to depend on your type of business. If you are running a law agency, that's a different type of backup than if you are running a software as a service, if you act in that capacity. There's backups for databases, which might need restoring and to be verified more often than your regular data, such as photographs, because that's the heart and soul of your organization. And that's my software development background talking. So when you move then into disaster recovery, I think those backups are exceptionally important to be able to keep your business continuity with your data running. I have seen an incident where that was not the case several years ago, that the backups were not available, and it took that organization several weeks to get to where it was operating normally, having to redo data integrations, et cetera. So these things do happen, and backups are a key component to disaster recovery, as well as making sure that key processes are available during the backup period in some sort of offline format would be something else to keep in mind with that.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question to you is, what are the resilience strategy against AI-based risk and threat for an organization? What kind of resilience strategy to have for AI or ML-based organization?
Oh, wow. I'll do my best with this one. So AI strategy will start with a very clear policy within your organization. I think so that would be the first step, is defining policy, taking a look at some of these new AI risk management frameworks that are coming out and determine what to do there, so that an organization can assess where it is, where it's going, and also what pertains, because some of these risk management frameworks are very broad and many of the aspects will not pertain. ML, I've only done a little bit of technical play within machine learning, so I understand what it does, how it does there, and the memes. I will say the same things need to take place in making sure that a company doing machine learning has the same sort of valuation practices in place to make sure that the machines are truly learning, whether they're supervised or unsupervised, that the core, does this even work, is in place, and organizations doing that work should understand that. So policies governing AI are very similar to policies governing cybersecurity in that they need to be applicable. They may need change to them based on frameworks that are specific to the organization, and they will need regular review.
Thank you, Heather, for answering that question. Our next question is, are costly tools needed for putting cybersecurity in place, or we can be starting with any awareness programs?
I think that costly tools are not where most businesses start because many businesses are small. In the United States, here there are some statistics to say that most businesses are small, and many of those are even 1 or 2 people. So cybersecurity practices for super small businesses don't start with tooling at all, other than maybe a backup program and antivirus, anti-malware software. So no, you don't have to start with costly tools. At some point though, in maturity of the organization, some tooling will be necessary to make sure that as a growing organization gains more data to protect and more complex ways that it does business interoperating with the internet and with people in other organizations, that some tooling will make sense to put in place. But no, you don't need it to start. I think training is exceptionally effective if it is ongoing, relevant to the organization, and relevant to the industry. I think those 3 things are very important. And please also remember role-based training for cybersecurity is very important as well.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question is, are third-party vendors and partners subject to cybersecurity assessments and requirements?
I think they should be in a cyber resilient organization. Third parties can certainly introduce risk. We've seen that in breaches in the past, even as far back as 10 years ago, that a third party vendor is how a major breach happened that affected many consumers in the United States, and I was one of them. So they should be put through the motions, and software vendors certainly understand that, often receiving many large questionnaires proving that the cybersecurity practices are in place for them. And so we, if we are not software vendors but use them, should require our software vendors to prove some sort of adherence to good cybersecurity practices and maybe even a framework. There's definitely risk there. Anytime we share data with another organization, it is risky. And even when we share certain data with the general public, we need to be very careful there with our own privacy to make sure we're not sharing the wrong things. The general public can become a third party.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question is, what are some of the sources of cyber attacks and ways, and as an administrator like myself, can imbibe to be with them?
Can you repeat that last bit?
Yeah. So the question is, what are some of sources of cyber attacks and ways an administrator like myself can imbibe, that's IMBIBE, imbibe to the with him? I don't know, it's
Okay. I will restate that as best I can. What are some of the sources of current cyber attacks and how do we talk about them, I'm going to say, within the organization? These are great for training. Current events are great for training staff because we can take current events and say this attack happened, and here's how the company that was attacked is similar to us and similar types of data. So some of the sources are going to be cyber criminals, people who are in it just for money. Some of the other sources are going to be activists. We saw that with some groups years back where websites were defaced for political reasons. And then certainly some of the sources of cyber attacks will be nation state actors. So advanced persistent threats, such as other countries who might mean the targeted country could be an enemy of that country or someone trying to gain intellectual property. So they can be corporate in that way. And these will make the news when they're successful, especially if they're against big companies. And so they make really good conversation points within the organization. If that's from a more technical nature, what are the different types of attacks coming in? Certainly in a general sense, against web applications, those attacks are prevalent, and then against networks as well. And so those two are conversation points for training of, well, how do they get in? They get in our buildings sometimes by pretending to be other people. They get in through social engineering by asking us for our credentials by pretending to be tech support. And then they can also get in directly into our networks and through our web applications. So those would be the key areas I would talk about with staff in terms of training.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question to you is, what are the bolster cybersecurity defenses?
So how do we bolster our cybersecurity defenses? I think that we look at what we have today in defense and we determine whether it's enough using those frameworks that we've decided we're going to follow, using compliance that is in place right now or maybe lacking. If there's a gap there, we identify a gap. And then we have to celebrate what we're doing well in order to bolster, because many organizations have been doing the work. And to get more money, more funding, more resilience in the organization, more commitment to that resilience in the organization, we have to be able to say, here's what we've done and here's the effect that it's had. And that helps in building the future and getting leadership involved to say, yes, this is something that's important to us. There are key things we can do in the organization without more funding, but it's certainly more of a help if we've got the backing and funding from the top layers of the organization that says this is a priority to us, to be resilient, to do a better job, to train our people, to put the right tools in place, to adhere to a framework, and also to tell our customers that we've done these things. I think that's how we bolster and that it's continuous.
Thank you so much, Heather, for answering that question. We'll take last two questions for the day. If SMBs were attacked and unable to recover, what would happen next for the SMB?
Oh, goodness. When an SMB, usually I'm going to segregate that as I do. Medium businesses can be fairly big businesses, and they're often more resilient by nature, understanding that they are either growing into bigger businesses or they're really effective big businesses. So let's take this question from a perspective of a small business, because small businesses are the heart of at least the US economy. And if a small business is attacked and it's not cyber resilient, if it doesn't have backups and it doesn't have staff ready and understanding that it might be attacked and here's what we're going to do, those tabletop exercises, the small business might go under. And by go under, I mean it might be in 3 to 6 months that small business can no longer justify staying in business because too much money and too much customer reputation for future revenue is impacted. And that's why even the smallest organization has to have a cybersecurity plan or it has to go completely offline. And I think we've proven that it's not feasible to go completely offline in the modern age.
Thank you, Heather. We'll take last question for the day. What are the frameworks for risk assessment, incident response, and security training?
My favorite frameworks come from NIST. I have my own for training, and I'll speak most to that. So NIST has an AI framework that was released recently, also has a risk management framework. And then the foundational framework of all frameworks is the cybersecurity framework, which is now in its second iteration, so version 2.0, and that's where the governance was added. So those are very solid places that are fairly readable documents that any organization can read through or find a guide to help get the key points pertinent to that organization. For security awareness training, I think the framework is that there's some training that every human has to take, regardless of his or her role within the organization. And that's the basics, covering the cyber hygiene behaviors that the people do, the anti-fraud training, and the things I've listed before. But in addition to doing that training, there needs to be another level or two of training that the organization plans to do. So consider an organization of maybe 20 to 50 people. There will be upper management. Those people in upper management need some sophisticated anti-phishing, anti-whaling, and anti-spear phishing training, because they themselves will be targets because they have the access to do things in the organizations that the regular users do not. Technical people need specific training about how their elevated privileges can lead them to be susceptible to attack, or the fact that their jobs go really well most days, and some days maybe they're complacent, much like we are when we learn to drive, and we can do a lot of driving on autopilot. And then finally, everyday people in customer situations may be a little bit removed from the intellectual property of the organization and might not value it as much. So training specific to the roles, training specific to current events and how it impacts both the organization's industry and the company itself. I think putting these things together can be very effective in an organization's plan to work in security awareness.
Thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Heather, for answering those questions and really for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Now, before we conclude the webinar, Heather, would you like to give a small message to our audiences, please?
We're going into the weekend, and so weekends can be ripe for cyber attack. You know, Friday evening, a lot of technologists will joke about that. So with these things we've shared, I invite you to share basic cyber hygiene with everyone you meet wherever it becomes applicable. It is a wonderful topic because our very young among us are digital natives, and our parents may not be as cyber savvy as they need to be. So take this message forward with what you know and help educate everyone and help every business that you meet be a little bit better in securing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather, for this message to our audiences. Before we end the session, I would like to announce our next Cyber Talk session, Mobile Device Forensics, Challenges and Solutions, which is scheduled for April 23rd, 2024. This is an expert presentation by Dr. Mike Saylor, CEO at Black Swan Cybersecurity and lecturer at university. To register for this session, please do go visit our website, www.eccu.edu/cybertalks. The link is given in the chat section. Hope to see you all on 23rd April. With this, we end the session. You may now disconnect your lines. Thank you.